Hello and welcome to all. More than 100 years have passed since the tragic sinking of the legendary liner Titanic, yet the many mysteries surrounding its sad fate have never ceased to intrigue scientists and historians of all stripes. For if in the collective imagination, the sinking of the Titanic is attributed to a collision with an iceberg, many theories have been put forward to prove the opposite, or at least prove that the collision is not the only cause of the sinking. From the most serious to the most far-fetched, however, these theories have the merit of trying to answer questions that have remained unanswered for a very long time and thus attempt to lift the veil on one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. So, could it really be that this tragic shipwreck was solely the result of serious and stupid negligence on the part of the ship's radio operator? Or could it be because the lookout did not see the iceberg in time, because he simply did not have access to a pair of binoculars? What if the iceberg itself hadn't been the cause of the shipwreck because the steel of the hull was supposed to withstand such a shock without splitting? Many messy questions that we will try to answer today as we look into the real reasons behind the tragic sinking of the Titanic. Let's get started. The Titanic was a liner in the fleet of the prestigious shipping company White Star Line and was launched on May 31, 1911. The gigantic ship was 269 meters long, 28 meters wide, and 53 meters high, from keel to chimneys, with a total weight of 46,000 tons, not counting of course the weight of the sumptuous furniture on board. With her extravagant measurements, the Titanic really had something to be proud of, since she was at that time the most luxurious and largest liner ever built by man. So, it's not really surprising that its inauguration brought more than 10,000 people to witness a new marvel of modern maritime technology. 10 days later, at exactly 12:15 p.m., the Titanic will start its engines to begin its maiden voyage from Southampton, England. On board are 1,845 people, including 953 passengers and 889 crew members, all of whom are extremely excited to be part of this incredible modern-day adventure. Yet during all the hustle and bustle caused by the departure of the huge ship and the frenzy of the passengers and their families who have stayed behind, the Titanic's captain, Edward John Smith, notices that not one ship in the harbor has sounded its sirens in tribute. For, as required by centuries-old maritime tradition, a new ship leaving a port must be greeted by the other ships present, or risk being hit by the terrible jinx of the oceans. Captain Edward, however, was not yet at the end of his troubles, and despite his cold-bloodedness as a hardened old sea wolf, another incident revived the old superstitions that were deeply buried in his memory as a sailor. In fact, as soon as the Titanic's huge propellers were set in motion, they caused a gigantic upheaval that broke the moorings of another ocean liner, the city of New York. The latter drifted dangerously towards the Titanic to a distance of less than 2 meters, narrowly missing to collide with it and cause a real catastrophe. In the end, there was more fear than harm, and the great liner was able to follow its course serenely, though secretly all the crew, led by Captain Edward, were quite shaken by these signs of bad omen. However, despite the ominous omens and the incidents, of course, the ship was sailing at a brisk pace and had already covered a good distance, while the cruise was in full swing among the passengers. On April 14, 1912, around 9 p.m., the Titanic had already covered 2,687 kilometers and was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, following a recommended navigation route. But that day, Jack Phillips, the ship's TSF operator, had received no less than 5 alert messages from several ships, all warning the liner of the presence of large icebergs. However, instead of following up and alerting his captain, he preferred to deal with the private telegrams of wealthy passengers, who wanted to send messages to their families. It is almost certain that greater involvement on the part of this unfortunate radio operator might have changed the course of this tragic shipwreck. But alas, the ship was still on course, maintaining maximum speed, unaware that the night was already falling. Wrapping her in her cloak of darkness would bring them an unfortunate fate. At precisely 11:40 p.m., while the Titanic was traveling at 22.5 knots, or 41.7 kilometers per hour, the two watchmen in the crow's nest on the foremast were horrified to see a huge mountain of ice rising out of the fog. The pristine iceberg was colossal and could have been seen from afar, even on this moonless night, if only the two lookouts had been equipped with binoculars. But then again, the bad luck was so bad that the only pair of binoculars available on the whole ship was locked in a safe, and unfortunately, the key was not available. Today, more than 100 years after the tragedy, many experts agree that it is because of detail as insignificant as the absence of a pair of binoculars that the Titanic met such a fate. But could it really be the sole cause of the terrible collision, which sent the liner more than 3,800 meters deep into the North Atlantic Ocean, and caused the deaths of nearly 1,522 passengers? It is now known that the vessel's course could have very easily deviated if only the radio operator had transmitted his alert messages, or if the lookouts had had binoculars at their disposal. The tragic collision could thus have been avoided, and the Titanic would not have come face to face with the titanic piece of ice that ripped it open and capsized it, except that a new theory has turned the whole official theory of the sinking upside down. The Irish journalist Sinan Milani, who is passionate about the famous liner, has indeed put forward a completely different hypothesis, the fruit of 30 years of research into this historic disaster. According to him, the iceberg that pierced the Titanic's hull was not the only cause that sent this brand new ship into the abyssal depths. An unpublished photo of the liner was found in an old album that hadn't been opened for 100 years, revealing a decisive detail that no one had ever noticed before. The Titanic can be seen docked in the port of Belfast, where it was built, and indeed, a mysterious black trace and distortion surreptitiously appears on the right side of the hull, just where the iceberg was going to puncture the ship a few days later. Based on these photos, the experts claim that the ship was weakened by a fire caused by a coal fire that broke out in the boiler room inside the 269 meters long liner. The fire is said to have started while the vessel was still in port, and according to various documents and testimonies, the firefighters were unable to contain it, leaving it burning for several weeks before it extinguished itself. The temperature was such that it exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius, which was more than enough to soften the metal and cause it to lose 75% of its strength, thus creating such deformation in the steel of the hull. The hull was so visible and unsightly that the ship had to dock on the other side, and the staff was instructed to minimize the problem and hide it from the 2,500 passengers on board. The risk of going to sea despite this fire on board was dictated by the will of the shipping company and the authorities, for purely financial and political reasons. Everyone agreed that the ship should not be moored in such conditions, but nobody wanted to lose money, and the British should not miss the opportunity to demonstrate their maritime superiority. The Titanic should, therefore, have stayed alongside and postponed its maiden sailing date until serious repairs could be made to the damaged hull, which would have prevented the loss of the Titanic and its passengers. But which was take place was written, as they say, and as more and more scientists study the matter, more and more is being learned about this unfortunate combination of circumstances and the almost inevitable nature of the sinking. It's as if nature itself had united against Titanic and wanted only one thing, to sink him. Thus, the very presence of an iceberg in this part of the Atlantic on the night of the tragedy would have been caused by a super full moon, which in astronomy means that the moon was at its closest point to the Earth. And taking into account the lunar activity on our planet's tidal system, this astonishing Earth-Moon proximity is never without serious consequences. This extremely rare phenomenon, which last occurred in the year 796, and will probably not occur again until 2257, might have created tides so strong that they would have dragged a whole armada of icebergs southward on the way to the Titanic's maiden voyage. But despite all the accounts of the survivors of the tragedy and their rescuers, despite all the investigations and documentaries, and despite all the fatal signs that accompanied its crossing, the Titanic remains a great deal of mystery that is still buried in the abyssal depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Many rumors have never been taken seriously, although reported by several sources and serious publications, no doubt because their paranormal and strange side made them seem unworthy of discussion. It is thus said that many ships would later experience very difficult times just in the area of the shipwreck, and observe several anomalies. It has long been said that John Jacob Astor IV, the richest passenger of the Titanic and who was returning from a honeymoon in Egypt, would have brought a mummy with him in the cargo of the ship. The mummy, disturbed in its eternal rest, is said to have put a terrible curse on the ship, drawing the wrath of Poseidon upon him. Other facts have also been ignored, such as the sighting of a Titanic ship covered with algae, observed in 1913 by the commander of the Lucilius in the North Atlantic. Or the encirclement in 1935 of the Titanian, a British ship, by icebergs appearing out of nowhere. The watchman of the Titanian was born on April 15, 1912, at 2:20 a.m., the exact day and time the Titanic tragically sank. Could it be mere coincidence? No one may ever know. But the tragic sinking of the Titanic will remain anchored in the collective human memory as one of the worst marine accidents of all time. And no pun intended, the little truth surrounding this disaster that we know to this day is only the tip of the iceberg, and much remains to be discovered. So, what do you think of the real reasons for the tragic sinking of the Titanic? Do you think all these new theories are really plausible? Give us your opinion in the comments. And if you liked the video, don't forget to put a blue thumb, subscribe and share it with your friends. See you tomorrow at the same time, the same channel for a new video.